I always believed Christmas had a way of softening even the hardest of years. A twinkle of light, the cinnamon scent of old recipes, a table full of mismatched traditions. It usually stitched something warm into the cracks of life. But that year, despite the same lights and the same cinnamon, something darker lingered under the glow, like a storm hiding behind a stained glass window. The house was quiet in a way it had never been. It was the first Christmas since my husband's passing, and though grief had loosened its grip over the months, the echo of his laughter still lived in the corners. I dusted the banister he used to lean against. I warmed the cider the way he taught me. I laid out the good plates, because he liked things to look special. But the warmth I tried to create felt artificial, like hanging lights on a burnt tree. Still, I had hope. Hope that my son, Evan, would walk through the door with the same easy smile he used to wear. Hope that maybe tonight, if only tonight, we could sit as a family again without tension crawling under the tablecloth. By 6 o'clock, the guests began to swirl in. My sister, always cheerful, my brother-in-law already smelling faintly of bourbon, a couple of nieces and nephews who darted straight to the dessert table. The house felt full, and the sound of lives colliding made me feel temporarily less alone. And then Evan arrived. He stepped through the doorway with a stiff smile that didn't reach his eyes. He hugged me with one arm, quick and polite, like greeting a stranger at the airport. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, hovered behind him with perfect lipstick and a brittle expression. "Hi, Mom," Evan said. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, pretending I didn't notice the tension radiating off him like static. He hadn't been calling much lately. His visits had become shorter, colder. When I asked how he was, he'd give clipped answers, as though conversation with me was a chore he needed to finish quickly. I told myself it was work, stress, life, anything but the truth whispering in my bones, that something was deeply, dangerously wrong. Dinner was served in the dining room, my husband's favorite room, now too big and too hollow. The chandelier flickered softly above the table, casting gold light that made everything look festive, even though my stomach had been twisting for days. Everyone passed dishes, exchanged holiday greetings, filled glasses. Laughter bubbled up here and there. But Evan and Melissa sat rigid, exchanging glances I couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger, not quite. It was more like anticipation. I should have known then. About halfway through dinner, while I was cutting into the roast, Evan tapped his fork against his glass. A crystal chime pierced the room. The chatter died instantly, replaced by the sudden expectation that he was about to make a toast. I looked at him, surprised and oddly hopeful. Maybe he wanted to acknowledge his father. Maybe he wanted to say something kind. Instead, he cleared his throat and said words no mother should ever hear. We talked, we voted, and his voice didn't tremble. That was the worst part. You are no longer a member of our family. My knife slipped from my hand, clattering against the plate. A few relatives gasped. Someone choked on their wine. My sister reached toward me, unsure. I just stared at my son, my baby boy, who used to fall asleep on my chest, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who cried when he lost his first tooth because he didn't want to grow up yet, and he looked back at me like I was a stranger he was politely evicting from his life. Melissa stared at her plate, but the corner of her mouth curled ever so slightly. A cruel little bloom. I took a slow breath and let the silence stretch. The room felt colder than the snow outside. A mother should break under such cruelty. A mother should cry, plead, ask why. But I didn't, because I had been preparing for this moment for months. The folder was in the drawer behind me, thick, sealed, and waiting. I pushed my chair back, stood up calmly, and walked toward it. My legs were steady. My hands didn't shake. Everyone watched me, bewildered, Evan most of all. When I returned to the table, I placed the folder in front of him. Warmly, almost gently, like handing over a Christmas card. "Well," I said, with a soft smile that felt like a blade, "if that's the case, then here is a parting gift for you." He blinked, confused. "Mom, what? Open it." He pulled the tab, lifting the flap. For half a second, he was just curious. Then his face changed. I watched the blood drain from his cheeks. I watched confusion melt into horror. I watched the moment he realized what I knew, what I'd always known, and then he screamed, a raw, explosive sound that shattered the festive air like glass. Melissa froze, her eyes widening. My sister clamped a hand over her mouth. A fork dropped somewhere in the room. Evan stared into the folder as if it contained a demon, but it contained something much worse, the truth, and consequences. I simply returned to my seat, lifted my glass, and waited for him to absorb the first wave of devastation. The Christmas table was broken now irrevocably, but for the first time all night, I felt a strange, liberating warmth rising in my chest. It was the beginning of the end, and the sweet beginning of justice. Long, emotional, slow, burning betrayal and the birth of a quiet revenge. Long before the Christmas table shattered beneath Evan's scream, the cracks had already been spreading, thin, sharp, fractures in the foundation of what used to be unconditional love. They began quietly, the way most betrayals do, slipping between moments of ordinary life until they became impossible to ignore. It started after my husband died. Grief rearranges families. Sometimes it pulls people closer. Sometimes it turns hearts into islands. But I never imagined it would turn my own son into someone I didn't recognize. In the weeks following the funeral, Evan was at the house constantly. He brought groceries, helped me sort through paperwork, checked in every evening. Some days he sat with me in silence because the house felt too loud with his father gone. He cried in my kitchen as he told me how much he missed him, and I held him the way I did when he was a child. For a moment I thought tragedy had strengthened our bond, but grief has a strange way of reshaping people. And some hearts under enough pressure bend in the wrong direction. As the months passed, the visits grew shorter, then less frequent, then strained. At first, I blamed work. Evan was always ambitious, always climbing ladders faster than seemed humanly possible. Stress changes people, I told myself. It makes them distant, tired, distracted, but it was more than that. It was the whispers, the looks, the late night phone calls he would abruptly end when I walked into the room. The way Melissa started acting like the house was hers to evaluate. She'd lift frames, flip through mail, open cabinets while smiling too sweetly, as if waiting for something to fall out. I caught the first real sign one Tuesday afternoon in early autumn. I'd come home from volunteering to find Evan in my study. My husband's study, rifling through drawers he had no reason to be touching. He straightened immediately when he heard me. "Mom," he exclaimed too quickly. "I was just looking for a pen." A pen? In a locked drawer he somehow had the key to. I wanted to believe the lie. I truly did. But intuition is a mother's oldest friend. That night after they left, I found the first red flag. A photocopy of my signature on a document I had never seen before. A financial authorization form. My hands went cold. I sat on the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in my grip, my heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. My son, my own son, was forging my name. At first, I convinced myself it had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe he was preparing something for me and hadn't explained it yet. Maybe it was a mix-up, but then I found the messages. I wasn't snooping, I wasn't searching. His tablet had been left logged in on my kitchen counter after he rushed out that evening. A pop-up message glowed on the screen, and because betrayal often speaks before it hides, I saw it. Melissa, she'll sign anything if we present it as estate planning. We just have to keep her thinking she's confused. Asterisk, 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 Evan. Asterisk, 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 I know. She's getting older, it won't be hard. Asterisk older, confused, she'll sign anything. My hands shook so violently I had to sit down. The worst part wasn't even the plan. It was the casualness, the confidence, the way my child spoke of me as if I were prey. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, feeling every memory of motherhood twist painfully inside me. The scraped knees, the science projects, the bedtime stories, all of it rearranging itself into something ugly. But grief had taught me one thing. When the world breaks you, you can either collapse or crystallize. I crystallized. The next morning I called a lawyer. I didn't tell Evan. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask why. Because I already knew why. My husband had left a substantial inheritance, a lifetime of careful saving and hard work. Money changes people, or maybe it reveals them. Over the following weeks, while Evan's calls became shorter and Melissa's smiles grew sharper, I began gathering information. Quietly, methodically, the way a mother cleans a house while pretending not to see the mess her children make. I hired an accountant to review my finances for suspicious activity. I printed every text message, every email, every forged document. I recorded conversations. I changed passwords no one knew I had access to. I secured my property in ways Evan didn't even know were possible. I even visited my doctor, just so there would be fresh, unquestionable proof of my mental clarity, should they try something more sinister. All the while, I acted as though nothing had changed. When Evan brought me flowers, I thanked him. When he asked me to sign harmless little forms, I played feeble and confused. Oh, I'm so tired today, maybe next time. When Melissa suggested I move to an assisted living facility for my own good, I smiled warmly and said, let's talk about it after Christmas. They believed every word, because love makes you blind, but so does greed. And as they pulled further away from me emotionally, they pulled closer to the versions of themselves they had been hiding. By November, I'd filled an entire drawer with evidence, enough to protect myself, enough to expose them, enough to ensure that whatever plan they thought they were orchestrating would collapse on their heads like a spoiled holiday cake. And then, one night, sitting alone at my kitchen table with only the hum of the refrigerator for company, I prepared the folder. Thick, heavy, final, a folder full of everything they thought I would never notice, everything they hoped I would be too old, too fragile, too stupid to understand. I sealed it and tucked it away, waiting. I didn't know when the moment would come. I only knew it would. So when Evan stood up at Christmas dinner, when he announced their vote, when he stripped me of family with a tone so cruel, it didn't even sound like his voice anymore. I wasn't surprised. If anything, I was relieved, because he had finally crossed the line himself, and I no longer needed to push him. I simply needed to show him what he had done. At that table, surrounded by garland and holiday lights, I handed my son the consequences of his own quiet cruelty, and the scream that tore from his throat was only the beginning. Asterisk long, emotional, intense unraveling of truth and the destruction of their scheme asterisk for a moment. The room held still, utterly still, except for Evan's ragged breathing. His scream had cracked the warm Christmas air, leaving an icy silence behind it. The kind of silence that comes when truth hits too hard, too fast, and too deeply to be ignored. He stared into the folder as if he were looking at a loaded weapon aimed straight at his chest. His hands trembled. His face drained of every shade of color, leaving him pale, ghostly, sick. Melissa leaned toward him, confusion wrinkling her perfect brow. Evan, what is it? What's wrong? He didn't answer. He couldn't, because the first page alone was enough to break him. Everyone at the table watched silently, the way people watch a building collapse in slow motion, horrified, transfixed, unable to turn away. The children had stopped talking. My sister's fork hovered midair. My brother-in-law's glass froze halfway to his lips. Under the glow of the chandelier, my son looked like a man whose entire reality was unraveling right in front of him. I took a sip of water and folded my hands in my lap. My heart was steady. My nerves were still. Months of preparation had carved a strange sense of calm inside me. He turned the first page, then the second and the third. His breathing grew louder, more uneven, as though the pages sucked the air out of his lungs one by one. What is all this?" he choked out. I leaned slightly forward, my voice soft. Too soft, almost tender, because the sweetness of justice has its own form of mercy. "It's everything you thought I didn't know," I said. Melissa snatched the folder and scanned the pages. And then she gasped. Not a dainty gasp, a sharp, visceral shock. The first set of documents were higher, resolution copies of the forged authorization forms, the ones Evan had created and attempted to submit to the bank. His attempt to access accounts that were not his. Each one stamped with the date, the attempt ID, and the bank's internal notation. Asterisk flagged for signature discrepancy. Asterisk behind them were side-by-side comparisons. My real signatures versus sloppy imitations he had produced, circled, highlighted, reviewed by a handwriting expert whose name and accreditation sat in bold letters. The next set of pages were printed screenshots of private messages between Evan and Melissa. The very messages they thought had long disappeared into digital ether. But nothing really disappears, not when someone knows how to find it, preserve it, and prepare it for the perfect moment. When Melissa reached the message where she described me as asterisk, ripe for manipulation, especially now that she's alone and emotional, asterisk, she covered her mouth with her palm, shaking. The room buzzed with tiny gasps, a whispered, "Oh my God," floated from somewhere down the table, but I wasn't done. Not yet. I had saved the most damning pieces for last. The next stack of papers was legal correspondence dated, signed, and notarized. Letters from my attorney, letters from the district financial crimes investigator, letters confirming that the attempted fraud was formally reported and documented. And at the very back, pressed neatly between stiff protective covers, was the final blow, the revised estate documents. Evan's name removed, Melissa's name removed. Every asset, every property, every account, every investment, every sentimental inheritance reassigned and protected under the foundation I'd created in my husband's name. A foundation they could never touch, ever. The only thing they stood to inherit now was their shame. Evan stumbled to his feet, clutching the folder like it was burning him. His voice cracked into a desperate, broken shout. "Mom, how could you do this? How could you? How could asterisk I asterisk?" I interrupted softly, or how could asterisk you asterisk? His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time in months, perhaps years, he had nothing to say. "You tried to steal from me," I continued, my voice still gentle. "You plotted to force me into assisted living so you could take control. You forged my name. You discussed me like I was an obstacle. Not a mother. That's not." He stammered, but the folder in his hands betrayed him with every incriminating page. Melissa looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. Tears spilled down her cheeks, streaking her mascara. She fumbled for justification, for excuses, for some kind of lifeline. We were just scared," she whispered. "We thought you were lonely. We thought you needed help. You thought I was vulnerable." I corrected. "And you thought that made me yours to control. No one touched their food. No one breathed too loudly." The Christmas lights behind me twinkled softly, mockingly, as if amused by the spectacle unraveling beneath them. Evan sank back into his chair, pressing both hands to his forehead, his entire body shaking. "Mom, please. We didn't mean, it wasn't supposed to, I mean." I shook my head. "I'm not interested in excuses, Evan. Only choices, and you made yours long before you stood up and voted me out." He winced. The words hit him harder now, echoing back at him with brutal clarity, And just so you're aware, I added, the investigator will be following up with both of you after the holidays. I asked them to wait until Christmas was over. I thought it would be kinder. Melissa looked like she might vomit. Evan looked like he already had. But if you cooperate fully, I continued, I will request that they pursue accountability, not imprisonment. That's the most mercy I can offer. A few relatives glanced at me, astonished. Mercy, after this, but mercy is not for the wicked. It is for the one who chooses not to become like them. Evan pushed the folder away as if the papers themselves were poisonous. His hands covered his face. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice small and broken. Mom, I'm so sorry. But the apology was years too late. And after everything, it was no longer mine to accept. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. I reached behind me, lifted my coat from the back of my chair, and draped it over my arm. I'm going home, I said softly. You are home, Evan cried, desperate, reaching toward me. I took a small step back. No, I replied. You made sure I wasn't? The room erupted into whispers as I turned toward the door. Some family members stood, unsure if they should follow. My sister reached for me, eyes shining with empathy, but I gave her a small nod that told her, it's okay. Let me go. At the doorway, I paused. I looked back at my son not with anger, but with a profound, unshakable sadness. You removed me from your family, I said, but tonight, Evan, you removed yourself from mine. And then I walked out, leaving the broken ruins of their conspiracy behind me. Christmas had always been a season of truth. That night it delivered it in full. A long, emotional, reflective ending filled with closure, quiet triumph, and healing. I hadn't realized how heavy the house felt until I stepped back inside it alone. Not lonely, just quiet, truly quiet for the first time in months. The shadows seemed softer, the air warmer. Even the ticking clock in the hallway sounded less accusatory. When I closed the door behind me, I exhaled, and the breath felt like it had been waiting in my chest since the very moment Evan first began distancing himself. I stood there, coat in hand, letting the silence wash over me like a long, overdue rain. The house wasn't empty. It was free. I walked into the living room, turning on the soft lamp beside the worn armchair. Light spilled over the bookshelves, over the old framed photos, over the little Christmas decorations my husband had insisted on keeping, even when the ribbons were frayed and the paint was chipped. I hung my coat, I set down my keys, I made myself a cup of tea and wrapped both hands around it, feeling the warmth seep into me. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I allowed myself to cry, not the kind of crying that crumbles you, not the kind that twists your stomach or steals your breath. This was a gentle release, like exhaling grief that had been sitting in forgotten corners of my heart. The tears came quietly, sliding down my cheeks without shame. They weren't for Evan. They were for the idea of Evan. The son I once believed would always protect me, cherish me, stand by me. The boy who held my finger with his tiny hand. The teenager who hugged me awkwardly but sincerely. The young man who cried at his father's bedside when the machines started to slow. That version of him wasn't gone. He just wasn't the one standing at the Christmas table yesterday. But even with all the pain, something unexpected bloomed inside me. Relief, A profound, steady relief that felt almost like peace. ###, a NEW morning, The next few days passed in a stillness that felt both strange and comforting. I received messages from relatives, some outraged at Evan, some offering support, some simply checking if I needed anything. My sister came by with soup and long hugs. I told her everything, and she listened without judgment. When she left, she kissed my cheek and said, "You're stronger than anyone gives you credit for." For the first time in a long while, I believed her. The investigator called me on the 27th, just as he promised. The case would move forward, but he reiterated what he'd told me earlier. Your testimony will decide how far this goes, ma'am. You have the right to request leniency. And I did. People think revenge is harshness, fire, fury. But in truth, the sweetest revenge is letting someone face what they've done. Not by punishing them more, but by refusing to carry the weight of their choices anymore. I didn't want Evan jailed. I didn't want Melissa destroyed. What I wanted was closure, accountability, distance, and above all, peace. ###***, the foundation ***, in early January. I visited the foundation I'd created in my husband's name. The Harold Bennett Community Scholarship Fund ***. It was housed in a modest brick building with a navy blue awning and a small sign. Inside, the lobby was warm and bustling with volunteers sorting supplies and greeting families in need. A young woman at the front desk smiled at me. "Mrs. Bennett, we were expecting you. The director is inside." The director! A kind, middle-aged man with gentle eyes walked me through the building, explaining where the funds were already being used. Scholarships for local students, emergency grants for struggling families, mentorship programs for teens at risk. I walked through each hallway, smiling, nodding, touching the walls as though they were new pages in the next chapter of my life. Standing before a framed plaque honoring my husband, I felt something shift inside me, a heavier grief lifting, replaced by something bright. Purpose, he would have loved this. And knowing that everything I owned, everything I worked for, everything Evan had tried to seize, was now helping people who needed it. It soothed a wound I hadn't realized was still open. "You've created something beautiful," the director said quietly. I closed my eyes, breathing in the truth of it. No, what I had created was freedom ***, Evan's messages ***. Evan reached out 3 times. The first was a shaky voicemail. "Mom, please, can we talk? I didn't mean for everything to get so out of hand. I saved it, but I didn't reply." The second was a text message. "I'm scared. Melissa is scared. Please tell them you don't want charges." I didn't reply. The third was a letter, handwritten, tear-stained, apologetic, desperate. I read it once. My heart tightened, but not in the way it used to. There was sadness, yes, but no guilt, no sense of obligation, no knee-jerk instinct to protect him from consequences. I placed the letter gently in a drawer and closed it. Some doors, once shut, do not need to be reopened. ###, rediscovering life ***, as winter melted into the edges of spring. My world blossomed in small but meaningful ways. I signed up for pottery classes. I began volunteering more. I reconnected with old friends. I even took trips, small ones, but far enough to remind myself that the world was still large and full of places I had never seen. Every step felt like reclaiming parts of myself I had lost while trying to hold onto a son who no longer wanted to be held. The most surprising part wasn't how good life became. It was how light I felt, how unburdened, how wholly, unapologetically alive. ###***, the final freedom ***, one evening, sitting alone on the back porch with a cup of tea. I watched the sunset paint the sky in soft coral hues. The air smelled of early spring, of possibility. For the first time in over a year, I said my husband's name out loud without crying. I thanked him for the life we built, the foundation that bore his name, the love we kept safe. Then I whispered something I never thought I would say. I forgive him, and not Evan's actions. Not the betrayal, but the boy he used to be. I forgave that version of him, the one I had loved with all my heart, because holding on to the hurt of who he became no longer served me. Letting go wasn't losing him, it was choosing myself. ###, the sweetness of freedom ***, on the first warm day of the year. I visited the garden my husband and I once tended together. I pruned roses, watered the soil, planted new bulbs. As I worked, I felt the earth soften beneath my fingertips. Life beginning again. When I stood back, wiping dirt from my hands, I realized something profound. They voted me out of their family, but in doing so, they freed me to reclaim my own life. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled deeply, peacefully, genuinely. The sweetness of freedom is not loud. It is not triumphant. It is quiet, steady, warm like sunrise after a long winter night. And I walked back into my home knowing this. I may have lost them. But I found *** myself ***.